When I was in grade 9, I was the co-editor of our school's yearbook. The other co-editor was my neighbor and friend, Rolf Woolner. And here it is. It's pristine. It's hardly been opened. It's hardly been opened. It's such a goofy thing to read, you know. There's this photograph series at the back and one guy's looking at an elephant, looking in a microscope, and the caption reads, "An elephant?" And then the whole series goes, "About that elephant you saw. So you say you saw an elephant, huh? Oh, I think elephants are adorable." All the way through the candid shots. You can have a look at it later. The photographs, I can't believe what I looked like in grade 9. I mean, I haven't changed much at all. I will pass it around, but what it might do is distract you. So you can have a look at it after the worship. The theme for the yearbook, actually, was Queen Elizabeth School's pollution protest. 1971-72. The messages, except for a kind of a note from the principal that talks about a good choice for a theme, very little is in the editor's message, which is the front page. Very little. It says, our theme this year was pollution and its threat to man's ecology, and then there's a poem. There's no attribute to the poem. There's no author, so I know that I didn't write it. Rolf was always smarter than me, so I think he wrote it. It reads this: the plague has spread from pole to pole. It girdles the equator, lies in places high and low. It devours the soul of its father, man, and as it contaminates, kills, and destroys. It is the child of man, but is an Absalom, referring to David's son, Absalom. Its parent it hates and declares absolute war on. David conquered. Another biblical response I never knew Rolf knew. So may we, if we return the attack, if we do, it may be that a voice shall be heard. The jubilant shout of a planet set free from the disgraceful bondage and ruin of pollution in land, air, water, and sea. Oh, the 70s. The 70s were the time when we began to notice things like acid rain. We were beginning to eat at our freshwater fish. It was a time when the U.S. launched the Energy Protection Act, or the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and they were beginning to launch and adopt clean air legislation. It was also the year when they began to measure the greenhouse gases in the air. 1970s was the year of the benchmark. Right? This is where we'll start to measure. 1971. You know, we were filled with agency. Oh, the message is scant, but it was mighty. All we had to do was take notice, right? We were filled with our own importance in grade 9. We were going to change the world. Who knew that 3 years later, my first car would be a boat? A Chevy Bel Air burning more gas in a week than my Fiat burns in a month. I gave up my message to just get around. 46 years later, the message is kind of still urgent. There's more urgency. Thanks to a global economy, we've grown our appetite for all things consumerable. We're more obese and more sedentary. There's a crisis of heart disease and diabetes. And we continue to seek more for less. At least that's what the scientists tell us. The global market economy is driven by our insatiable appetite and the acquisition of stuff. The middle class is growing in the world's largest economy, China. It appears that the Western lifestyle has caught on, and they want what we have. And they're burning fossil fuel and coal at a greater rate than any other country in the world. But here's the thing. The United States, the European Union, India, Russia, and Japan aren't actually far behind. Yeah, those six countries are producing 70% of CO2 emissions. At least that's what some scientists tell us. Canada is somewhere near the bottom, something like less than 2%. Global shipping produces more greenhouse gases than all of Canada's contribution to greenhouse gases. But here's the thing, 97% of the studies on atmospheric warming all indicate that since 1970, 2 years after my yearbook, the level of CO2 in the atmosphere has grown faster than at any other time in the Earth's history, and greenhouse gases turn the sun's infrared light into heat. Second, most of the increase, according to 97% of the reports, most of this increase is a result of human behavior. Now, 3% of climate change studies question those statistics, citing mathematical errors in the scientific equations. These studies tell us a number of things. We cannot stop climate change. Full stop. And to think we can by buying peas from Canada and not China is delusional. Studies into the geological cores of the Earth show that the Earth's climate has changed dramatically at least 7 times in the history of the Earth, and nothing could stop it. So that's true today. The second, the CO2 emissions don't take into account the Earth's capacity to absorb CO2 in the oceans and in the vast spans of vegetation in Canada and Russia and Brazil. Measuring CO2 emissions, according to these studies, without measuring CO2 absorption, skews the findings, says the report. Some studies report that in many places on the planet, the green is in the places where there's absorption, the Earth is actually greener because of CO2. CO2 is a gas necessary for life. There's a guy, Philip Stott. He's the professor emeritus at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. In 2005, he wrote these words: "The most fundamental question is, can humans manipulate climate predictably? Or more scientifically, will cutting carbon dioxide emissions at the margin produce a linear, predictable change in climate?" The answer is no. In so complex, a coupled, nonlinear, chaotic system as climate, doing nothing at the margins is as unpredictable as doing something. This is the cautious science. Cool, hey? And so while some scientists agree with that, they argue that there's only so much capacity that the Earth has to absorb the CO2 in the oceans and the green spaces. The oceans are already more acidic and warmer than they once were in 1970. My daughter-in-law measures the depth of the permafrost in Arctic Canada, for Parks Canada. The top layer is always shifting because of seasonal freezing and thawing, right? But that layer is getting deeper. That variable sea, that's getting deeper. And here we are, hey? One group of scientists says this, another group of scientists says that. Kinder Morgan, yes? No. Site C, yes. No. I'm feeling, use of straws and plastic, yes. No. I'm feeling the way I did in 1972. A walking contradiction. Not unlike Al Gore, who flies all over the earth to talk about climate change. Or David Suzuki, who used to fly weekly to Toronto to produce The Nature of Things. Walking contradictions. But do we stay silent if we're living in a contradiction? Do we stay silent? And here's the thing, we come to the prophet, Hosea. The prophet Hosea's problem was not politics, it was religion. Hosea watched what was happening. He was preaching in Israel in the northern country and was watching the political alliances being made with Assyria. But what was troubling for him was that it was the religious alliances that were being made and the false gods being worshipped. It's the unfaithfulness of Israel that he's pointing a finger at. And what was the unfaithfulness? What's our unfaithfulness? A couple of things come to mind as I think about the Gospel of John. In the beginning, it starts, was the Word. The Greek word is logos. The Hebrew word is Sophia. In the beginning was the Word, was wisdom. Sophia, wisdom. And the wisdom was with God, and the wisdom was God. Christ, the wisdom of God, was with God in the beginning. Through her, all things were made. Without her, nothing was made. In her was life. In wisdom was life. In the wisdom of God, the Christ of life was life. And the life was light to all people. And the darkness could not overcome it. What's the prophet lifting up? Unfaithfulness. And listening to the Gospel of John, in the beginning, connects us to the very beginning of all of creation. In the beginning, lands us on the first story of creation, when God created out of chaos. In the beginning, at the time of chaos, and God hovered like an eagle over her nest, God creates. And we remember, on the sixth day of that reality, God creates us in the image and likeness of God, male and female, blessed and given dominion over the earth. Recall this lesson from Genesis 1, right? In the beginning. John's connecting Christ to the beginning. The problem, we think that this word from God has given us power over. To be given dominion is to dominate things. Depending on who has the bigger army, the bigger bank account, the better religion. Our ecology has become one of domination. And we've taught the world well. Consider the growing middle class in the world's largest economy. Acquire, dominate at all costs. That's how we've interpreted the word dominion. But if we've been created in the image and likeness of God, and given dominion over the earth. We've been given that dominion as God has dominion over the earth. We have dominion as God has dominion. All of a sudden, that lands on us in a completely different kind of way. With Christ at the beginning, connected to the creation over which we have dominion, what we do to the earth, we do to Christ. So, we're caught, aren't we? We're caught. I'm interested in the scientific studies only insofar as they kind of give us the lay of the land. But I can't do anything about the growing middle class in China. I might try to avoid buying things made in China, but I don't do that very well. I don't know about you. It's always very interesting to read the studies. And lots of the material creates fear. I don't know if anybody's walking around with some fear going on when all of the noise happens. I'm interested, however, more in the Word of God that lands on us today and calls us to live as though God's peaceable kingdom is already here. It's already come. I'm interested in acquiring, in spending, in loving, in protecting God's green earth as if I have dominion over God's green earth the way God does. The walking contradiction that I am. Just because, here's an aside, just because I'm annoyed with the US, because I kind of am. If I want oranges, does it make sense to buy them from South Africa? No. I don't think so. Perhaps by buying from the US, we might have a greater influence on their commitment to reducing emissions, more so than if we just simply stay annoyed. That's just an aside. I think this is what we do with God's word, to God's prophet. When we buy something at home, or when we buy something for here, let's ask ourselves the question, is this purchase consistent with having dominion over the earth as God does? That's the question. The healing of the earth comes with your actions empowered by the Spirit. My actions empowered by the Spirit, walking contradictions that we are. Hosea said, the people lost faithfulness. The healing of our world comes with our faithfulness. Be faithful. We trust that whenever we kind of lay down those things that we carry, including our own culpability, when we're not faithful, when we'll set that down and say, God, this is me, all of who I am, we can take the very next breath as a new creation. Please pray with me. Holy God, we do that. We recognize that the words of the prophet land on us sometimes, and we aren't faithful. We haven't been faithful to the way we have been created in your image, blessed, acted as blessed, and then acted as if we had dominion like you do. We are walking contradictions. That's true. And so we name that. Trusting in the words of Maya Angelou, when we know better, we do better. And you love us regardless. We give you thanks for that. Amen. peace of Christ be with you. As you experience this peace, I invite you to pass it to one another. Use the words, may the peace of Christ be with you.
Series that Blair is talking about, The Cries of Our Time. We're going to sing this song after the 2 readings each Sunday. So I invite you to think about the reading that you heard while we sing this.